In 1975, a 24-year-old electrical engineer named Steven Sasson was tinkering in Kodak's research lab when he built something that would eventually destroy his employer's entire empire. Using a CCD sensor, some Motorola parts, and a digital cassette recorder, Sasson created the world's first digital camera. The contraption weighed 8 pounds, took 23 seconds to capture a single black and white image, and displayed photos on a television screen. When Sasson demonstrated his invention to Kodak executives, their response was lukewarm at best. The image quality was terrible, they reasoned, and who would want to look at pictures on a TV when you could hold beautiful prints in your hands? More importantly, why would Kodak want to pursue a technology that could eliminate the need for film, the very product that had made them billions? At that moment, Kodak made a decision that would haunt them for decades. They buried Sasson's digital camera invention, classifying it and keeping it locked away in corporate vaults, convinced that protecting their film business was more important than revolutionizing photography. For over a century, Kodak had been synonymous with photography itself. Founded by George Eastman in 1888, the company democratized picture-taking with the simple slogan, "You press the button, we do the rest." Their business model was brilliant and ruthlessly profitable. They sold cameras at low margins, sometimes even at a loss, but made enormous profits on film and photo processing. This razor and blade strategy generated gross margins of 70% on film sales. By the 1990s, Kodak controlled 67% of the global film market and commanded 90% of film sales in the United States. The company employed over 145,000 people worldwide and was worth over $31 billion at its peak. Kodak's yellow film boxes were as recognizable as Coca-Cola bottles, and their processing labs dotted street corners in virtually every city in America. The company wasn't just successful, it was untouchable, generating over $16 billion in annual revenue from an ecosystem built entirely around chemical film processing. But Kodak's dominance had made them dangerously complacent and myopic. Despite inventing digital photography, the company spent the next 2 decades actively working against their own innovation. They continued pouring research dollars into improving film technology while treating digital as a distant, inferior threat. Kodak's executives convinced themselves that consumers would never abandon the superior quality and tangible nature of film prints for pixelated images on computer screens. They were particularly dismissive of digital photography's early limitations. The first consumer digital cameras in the 1990s could only store 8 to 16 images, cost over $700, and produced grainy photos that looked amateur compared to film. Kodak's leadership used these shortcomings to justify their strategy, arguing that digital was a niche technology for professionals, not mainstream consumers. When they did enter the digital market, it was half-heartedly and mainly to prevent competitors from gaining ground, not because they believed in the technology's potential. Meanwhile, the rest of the world was rapidly embracing digital innovation. Companies like Canon, Sony, and Nikon poured resources into digital camera development, treating it as the future rather than a threat. Sony launched the Mavica in 1981, the first commercial electronic camera, followed by Canon's RC701 in 1986. These companies didn't have Kodak's film profits to protect, so they could pursue digital technology aggressively without cannibalizing existing revenue streams. More importantly, the semiconductor industry was advancing at breakneck speed, following Moore's law to double processing power every 2 years. Digital sensors became sharper, memory cards grew larger and cheaper, and camera prices plummeted. By the late 1990s, digital cameras were producing images that rivaled film quality, while offering instant gratification that film could never match. Consumers could take photos, see them immediately, delete bad shots, and share images electronically. The convenience factor was becoming undeniable, but Kodak remained convinced it was a passing fad. The rise of the internet and personal computers created a perfect storm that accelerated digital photography adoption beyond anyone's predictions, including Kodak's. Email became mainstream in the mid-1990s, and suddenly, people wanted to share photos digitally rather than mailing physical prints. The launch of photo-sharing websites like PhotoBucket in 2003 and Flickr in 2004 gave consumers platforms to showcase their digital images to global audiences instantly. Social media platforms like MySpace and later Facebook made photo sharing a core part of online social interaction. Digital photos weren't just convenient, they were essential for participating in the internet age. Meanwhile, photo editing software like Adobe Photoshop became accessible to consumers, giving them creative control over their images that film processing labs never could. Home printers improved dramatically, allowing people to print their own photos on demand without visiting Kodak's processing centers. The entire ecosystem around photography was shifting digital, and Kodak's film-centric business model was becoming obsolete practically overnight. The most devastating blow came from an unexpected source that Kodak never saw coming: camera phones. When the first camera phone launched in Japan in 2000, followed by models in the United States in 2002, Kodak dismissed them as toys with terrible image quality. The early cameras produced grainy, low-resolution photos that were laughably bad compared to film or even standalone digital cameras. But technology companies understood something Kodak didn't. Convenience trumps quality for most consumers most of the time. People began carrying cameras in their pockets everywhere, taking spontaneous photos they never would have captured with traditional cameras. The camera phone market exploded when Apple launched the iPhone in 2007 with a built-in camera, followed by Android devices with increasingly sophisticated imaging capabilities. Suddenly, everyone had a high-quality camera with them constantly, connected to the internet for instant sharing. The number of photos taken annually skyrocketed from 25 billion in 2000 to 350 billion by 2011. But almost none of them used Kodak film. Instagram's launch in 2010 represented the final nail in Kodak's coffin, proving that the future of photography was entirely digital and social. The app allowed users to take photos, apply professional-looking filters, and share them instantly with followers around the world. Instagram gained 1 million users in just 2 months and reached 100 million users by 2012. The irony was staggering. Kevin Systrom and Mike Krieger, Instagram's founders, created a billion-dollar photography company with just 13 employees, while Kodak employed over 145,000 people and was hemorrhaging money. Instagram proved that modern photography wasn't about image quality or physical prints. It was about instant gratification, social sharing, and digital connectivity. The company that had democratized photography with "you press the button, we do the rest" was being replaced by a new mantra: you press the button, you share with everyone, instantly. Facebook acquired Instagram for $1 billion in 2012, the same year Kodak declared bankruptcy, symbolically marking the complete transition from analog to digital photography. Kodak's financial decline was swift and brutal once digital adoption reached critical mass. The company's revenues peaked at $16 billion in 1996, then began a steady decline as film sales evaporated. By 2011, Kodak's revenue had fallen to just $6 billion, and they were losing money every quarter. Their stock price, which had reached over $94 in 1997, collapsed to under $1 by 2011. The company desperately tried to reinvent itself, investing heavily in digital cameras, printers, and even pharmaceutical chemicals. But none of these ventures generated profits large enough to replace their lost film business. Kodak's digital cameras were technically competent, but arrived too late to compete with established players like Canon and Sony, who had years of head start. Their printer business faced fierce competition from HP and other established manufacturers. Most painfully, Kodak discovered that digital photography was far less profitable than film had been. Digital cameras were one-time purchases that lasted for years, unlike film, which customers bought continuously. There was no digital equivalent to Kodak's lucrative photo processing business, as consumers could now view and share photos without printing them. The company made increasingly desperate attempts to monetize their vast patent portfolio, filing lawsuits against competitors and trying to extract licensing fees from their own digital innovations. Kodak sued Apple, Samsung, and other technology companies, claiming their digital imaging patents were being infringed. While they won some settlements, the legal fees and time invested in litigation distracted from developing new products and business models. Kodak also tried to reinvent themselves as a commercial printing company, leveraging their expertise in imaging technology for business applications rather than consumer photography. They invested in digital printing presses, packaging printing, and even 3D printing technology. But these markets were highly competitive with lower margins than their historical film business. The company that had once printed billions of family memories was reduced to printing business documents and packaging materials. On January 19, 2012, Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, ending one of the most dramatic corporate collapses in American business history. The company that had invented digital photography employed 145,000 people at its peak and generated $16 billion in annual revenue was destroyed by their own invention. During bankruptcy proceedings, Kodak sold off their patent portfolio for over $500 million, including many of the original digital photography patents that Steven Sasson had developed in 1975. The bitter irony was unmistakable. Kodak's most valuable assets in bankruptcy were the digital innovations they had spent decades trying to suppress. The company emerged from bankruptcy in 2013 as a much smaller enterprise focused on commercial printing and imaging services for businesses, employing fewer than 8,000 people. Their consumer photography business, which had defined the company for over a century, was completely eliminated. Today, more photos are taken every 2 minutes than were taken in all of the 1800s, but Kodak captures virtually none of that value. They created the technology that made modern smartphone photography possible, then watched helplessly as Apple, Google, and social media companies built trillion-dollar empires on digital imaging innovations that Kodak invented but refused to pursue. Steven Sasson's 8-pound digital camera prototype from 1975 didn't just capture the world's first digital image, it captured the future of photography. But Kodak was too afraid of cannibalizing their past to embrace it.